What's something you can admit about a company you no longer work for? Stanford University has a database full of everyone that's ever attended the school or ever been treated at their hospitals. With the right access, you can look up anyone in their system and see their employment history, every place they've lived since graduating, and their connections within the larger Stanford community. The best part, there's a section that gives all the tax income information with an estimate based on equations that say how much the person could realistically donate to the school without negative effect. That way, when they call to fundraise, they know exactly how much to ask for. Meanwhile, my school likely has the exact same data aggregation system, and when they call, email me, often begging for medium donations, I remember the time every time that they gave me zero financial aid and tell them that I had a 3.9 college GPA, no family graduates of a BA, much less an MA ever, family income of tilde 25K/year including me, and worked a full-time job through school and played their D1 sports when I needed that relief most. And when a billionaire left a 10 mil investment, he stipulated it could not be used on scholarships, and they agreed. Yeah, I may make a lot now, but also you didn't give a rat's ass when I was struggling. We supported 1,000 plus businesses' office phone systems, and they all used the same password for their admin access to their systems. I'd bet money your company name is somewhere in that password. Bingo. I worked for a research company which had around 100 subscriptions. They used the same passwords for all the accounts. They also did not change the passwords when researchers would leave the company. When I mentioned that this was a massive security risk, they shrugged their shoulders and said they believed fired employees would know not to use the subscriptions. Lunacy. A lot of small businesses are really dirty in their kitchens. Like, they have the outward presentation of being a fancy French bakery, but the floors are dirty and there's bugs everywhere, and they're reusing dirty sheet pans from raw product for baked product and spreading frangipani all over things that shouldn't be covered in raw nut butter. But if you try and call that out, you're a bitch and fired. Lol. I don't know the specifics, the laws and such, but the manager of the Amazon warehouse I was at wasn't allowed to tell workers they couldn't use the fans or AC in these 100-degree plus environments. But somehow he was allowed to shut off the fans and AC whenever he wanted. So this guy would spend the entire day, most days, following around anyone who would turn them on and personally turn them back off immediately. He was later fired on paper for telling people they couldn't use the fans and AC, but really it was because the new district head just didn't like him. Amazon had absolutely no problems with the guy shutting fans off. People had been sending in complaints about it for years, but never had a word back about it. I worked for Zoox, who is owned by Amazon, developing their autonomous vehicle platform. They constantly told you to report anything against the rules and regulations. They would fire drivers and contractors left and right for minor accidents. It was obvious they learned from their few warehouses that unionized and cracked down to ensure it never happened there. Here's an open secret. It workers are really good at Googling your problem. Sometimes I'll just copy paste the exact error my client sends me into the search browser. Product name, paste the error. Stack Exchange will show me 100s of other people who've had the same problem, and there's usually the most upvoted solution at the top non-advertised result. That's not restricted to IT. Even doctors leave the room to go look up your symptoms and deduce what the issue is. They used to do it with books, now they use the internet. Edit. I am not complaining about doctors using the tools they have available. I am pointing out that it happens. I work in IT. I also use Google to diagnose issues. College bookstores are a fucking racket. The used books that are sold for a high cost were likely bought back for a fraction. The only people that got the good price for book buyback were the first 10 people selling that book back. I saw a book be bought back for $200, and the next person through with that exact same book got offered $50. The add-ins for things like clickers were obscene. Books that were OKD for the school year would regularly get new versions that could just have 2 chapters flipped, but the new version meant that nobody could buy used, and the prof that wrote it gets a huge payout. The few good profs that gave away their materials were few and far between. The notion that digital books would be cheaper is laughable. Sure, they're charging $100 versus $200, but that's a $100 PDF. It's a racket, and I'm glad I don't need to mess with it anymore. I worked for a very popular fast food chain and was shocked to find out their hygiene standards were actually high and everybody followed them. Like, everyone really did their job, and the place was really clean and safe. McDonald's? I assume McDonald's it was indeed. Back about 30 years ago, I worked in the IT department for a famous brand name aerospace firm. name withheld to protect the innocent engineers, specializing in the construction and testing of satellites. My main responsibilities were maintaining some very old computer systems, a lot of stories about that, and some ground equipment, but sometime I would have to put on a bunny suit and fix something at engineering workstations in the high bays. One day, a strange wooden box about size of a large shoebox was shipped to my desk by the internal mail people. I sometimes got shipments of things like memory modules or hard disks, but this box has paper stickers on it clearly labeled flight hardware, something that should never have been shipped to me. Out of curiosity, I opened it and found in the box a device called a flight sequencer, basically one of the key devices that controls a spacecraft in flight. What was stranger, the spacecraft that this sequencer belonged to was a high-profile deep space probe for a Mars mission, one of the first missions to Mars in a long time. More confusing was that Mars craft has been launched about 3 months earlier, so I found myself holding the flight hardware sequencer for a space probe that was already several million miles away, and there would be no chance to install it now. Of course, there is a nearly 100% chance a spare had been used for the launch, but there was a certain *T moment when I realized what it was. Of course, a few months later, that space probe was lost when it tried to enter Mars orbit. I'm sure that is completely unrelated chance, right? I worked for a candy company that makes chocolate-coated pretzels and turtles for over 5 years. By the time I left, I wouldn't eat the candy even when they were giving it away. I saw them let tainted product leave the factory and covering it up because reworking it would be too expensive to faking food safety compliance and safety checks. Years after I left, the entire team running operations got replaced, so maybe it's better now, but holy shit, it made me paranoid about packaged food in general, and a little horrified at how much blind faith we put in the people that make our food. Edit, don't want them to sue me, so I won't say the name, but it's basically the top result when you Google chocolate turtles. Tech companies are laying people off in the masses, yet those same companies are still spending like crazy on their offsites or partnership for lunch and learns and account mapping exercises. I understand the dollars come from separate budgets, but someone was let go or not given a raise so you could treat 20 people to dinner and drinks. Wait till you find out about how much is allocated for stock buybacks. Many of the 2-3-year-old lease cars that look like they're in pristine condition really aren't. They get sent to major auctions that recondition them to make them look as new as possible in the quickest, cheapest way possible. Dings and chips get fixed, but not in a proper way. Prep is done hastily, paint may flake off in 1-2 years, parts like trim and handles are masked off instead of removed, much like a Mako job, etc. It just has to look pristine, rolling across the auction block and sitting on the used dealer's lot. After that, it's the buyer's problem. It's also while some frequently blame manufacturers for absolute shit finishes on slightly used cars, there's many on the road that it's caused by an auction's refinishing process. I worked for Apple and Apple Care Worldwide based out of the US as essentially a tier 3 or 4 tech support depending what the issue was. Most of my customers were businesses, celebs, politicians, etc. or escalations for T2/3 who needed support from Apple's engineering team. At least 5% of the tickets I handled per week were people who would never have access to their Apple ID ever again, functionally bricking their devices as well. Of those, 90% were due to an Apple issue. Once it happened to a prime minister of a European nation, and once to a company with over 1,000 devices, all using a domain-controlled Apple-deployed Apple ID management server. Also, the prevalent data breaches that got reported and ignored was horrifying. I'll never own an Apple product. I have worked in many restaurants. Many have poor hygiene. I would always wipe the cutleries whenever I go out. The worst 2 places I ever work in has pests in their kitchen and diner space, having to spray insects all the time. First restaurant I worked in closed down. Everything was so dirty in the kitchen area with dirt on cans and kitchen equipment being so run down. Another one is a ATS restaurant chain. Lots of pests in many of their chains. I was a manager, so I was told news about it as well. Their kitchen weren't as great, but their diner space looks 10x better than their kitchen. Sometimes pests get into their food from what I heard, if not running around the restaurant itself. Many bosses will bribe the people who come and do checks on their chains and restaurants to make sure they have a proper hygiene status. I don't even want to know how many meal deliveries I've bought over the years from places that were infested. Let's put it this way. Years ago, I was bragging to a cab driver about a new job I had just gotten. When he asked about the company, I told him it was a family business. He replied, "You're screwed." He was right. Family businesses tend to end up on the ends of the spectrum. Either they're the best or an absolute horror show. You hear a lot more stories of the horror shows though. Working for Tesla was one of the worst jobs I have ever had. Elon Musk was such a prick and treats people subhuman. That's not an exaggeration. I've seen it personally. That would be about the worst kept secret ever. I think anyone who has paid even the most scant attention to him in the last 5 years would probably assume correctly that it's true of him. Imagine it with his resources. He wasn't a through and through asshole and used those resources to do something great. I have a friend who used to work for one of his companies. Whenever Elon came to visit, he always wanted to get hands-on with whatever they were doing, and he usually ended up breaking something. They decided the best way to resolve this was to take a specific laptop, code a useless control panel that actually did nothing, and leave it near places he would go for photo ops. So when you see pictures of him looking at stats and graphs and pushing buttons on some laptop, the laptop is actually doing absolutely nothing.
If you want, you can like and subscribe.